I will retell you a fairy tale that I wrote myself over the course of about 20 years. The Glass Prince, version 2. Once upon a time, in a kingdom by a sea, there was a king and a queen who loved each other very much, and they were both very dynamic people. They were go-getters. And the queen, because her husband was always doing something very adventurous, going off climbing this mountain or conquering that enemy or finding this secret treasure map, etc., she had time to herself to be with her friends. And one of her best friends, one of her ladies in waiting who took care of her, was the maid of her chambers. Queens have these sorts of things, some nobility that's very close to them. Best friend, as well as being the queen's right-hand woman. They both got pregnant from their husbands at the same time, and they had their children on the same day. And the children always played together. Well, the children were toddlers together, but somewhere around the age of 4 or 5, the king got wind of an extraordinary kingdom far away that had gold trees and diamond fruit on these gold trees. And he thought, I have to have some of this. And so he got together a small party of botanists and soldiers, and he went off to get some of the gold trees with the diamond fruit. Well, he was gone for years, and the queen knew that when he left, this was going to be a long one. So she was left to rule the kingdom. Now it just so happened that there was another kingdom nearby that heard the king had gone off to get gold and trees with diamond fruit and thought, A, this is an opportune time to invade because the king's not there. It'll be easy to fight and win and beat this kingdom. And B, then we'll have the kingdom. And when he shows up again with the gold trees and the diamond fruit, then we'll get it. So they started to attack the kingdom. But the queen was fierce, like Elizabeth I defeating the Spanish Armada, like Boudica up against the Romans. This queen put on her specially made armor and she went to war. But it was a long war. The two kingdoms were pretty evenly matched. And so she was gone from the palace a lot. It also happened that the son of the lady in waiting was lost in the forest. There was some kind of hunting party and some kind of confusion, and the child was lost. They thought that wild animals had eaten him. They didn't know what happened to the boy, just lost at about 5 years old in the deep woods. Tragic. All of this meant that the royal prince, heir to the throne, at 5 years old, lost his father and his mother, she was away so often, and his best friend, his playmate, born on the same day. Over time, though there were many courtiers, grown-ups, looking after him, bathing him, clothing him in fine silk robes, giving him the best education with the most interesting history books, still, over time, over the years, he got lonelier and lonelier and lonelier. It was like there was no one there to pay him any attention. All the courtiers' attention was perfunctory. It was because they were doing their jobs and he was the royal prince. It wasn't the love of a mother, a father, or a best friend, a friend who's like a brother or sister. So by the time the prince became a teenager, he slowly started to fade away from life. And little by little, you could start to see the furniture through him. And little by little, he moved less and less. He just sat in his room, fading away, until at the age of 16, he was made entirely of glass. The one person in the castle who really cared about the prince and was not preoccupied was the court jester. Now, of course, everyone thought the court jester was just a silly old fool. And in fact, the prince loved the jester, loved his jokes, his songs, his acrobatic stunts and pratfalls, loved them. But the prince looked at him as a jester, and he was a friend, but he wasn't someone from whom you get love and nourishment. And in fact, the jester, he knew how to be funny. He did not really know about how to build a relationship. That's why he became a jester, so that he wouldn't have to engage in householding and building relationships and raising a family. He could just be funny. Just take it from me. It's a whole life occupation. But the jester really did love the prince. He had known him since he was born. So the jester took it upon himself to care for the prince in his predicament. He had the courtiers move this glass statue of the prince down into a beautiful rose garden where he might be surrounded by beauty. He thought, maybe when he sees the beautiful roses as they bloom in the spring and summer, and he's close to their fragrance, maybe this will bring him back. It did not. It did not at all. So the jester thought, well, I can't just sit here. I have to do something. I'm good at making jokes, but this glass statue isn't responding to any of my pratfalls and none of my songs. So I'm going to have to take on a bit of an adventurer role and take it upon myself to go and find out some cure for this predicament so that my prince can be restored to a real flesh and blood prince, not a glass prince. And he thought, I know there are witches out on the outer edges of the kingdom. I will go and consult with the witches. This is clearly some extraordinary metaphysical occurrence. I will ask them what to do using magic. And so he left the castle, and the first place that the fool went was to the dungeons of the Black Witch, for she lived in dungeons of stone below the earth. And he found her cave door, and he went down, down, down into her dark, black stone granite dungeons. And there he knocked on her big stone door with the big iron knocker. Black Witch, from the depths of the stones, I am a fool who seeks your wisdom and your power. Please, will you help me? And the Black Witch opened the door and said, what will you give me if I help you? And the fool said, I know witches of the earth like things from the earth. I have gold from the castle. I will give you all my gold if you will help me find a cure for the Glass Prince. The Black Witch nodded and took the gold and brought him in. And she said, come, come, come to my cauldron. I have something being treated in a potion. And in the potion, in the cauldron, the fool looked, and in this middle of this greenish liquid, he could see iron links at the bottom of the cauldron. Well, the witch took the cauldron, and she had two of her monkey servants put wood staves on either side, and they lifted it off the fire, and they carried it over to a trough, and they poured the green liquid out of the cauldron and left this iron chain on the floor, soaked in whatever the green potion was. And the green potion had taken the iron and made it black as night. It was like looking at a chain that was made of the night. And the fool said to the witch, what do I do with this? And she said, take it and wrap it around the Glass Prince. Wrap it around from the feet to the head. Be careful not to scratch the glass, for this is the hardest iron that has been ever made, and I have hardened it with my magic potions. And the fool, oh, tried to lift the chain. It was the heaviest thing he had ever lifted. And he dragged it, he put it in a sack, and he dragged it across the floor, and he dragged it out the big stone door, and he dragged it up the cave stairs, and he dragged it out into the open, where fortunately he had a rather strong donkey to travel with, and he put it in the bag on the back of the donkey, and the donkey's knees bent, and the donkey and the fool slinked back to the castle. Well, the fool had to get the help of several of the farm boys and a couple of the courtiers and pages, and they wrapped the glass statue in the black chain. They put it around his feet and around his legs, around his waist, around his arms and torso, around his neck, around his head, until the last link rested on top of the glass prince's head. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited. Days went by. Nothing changed. They could see through the links the glass prince was as glass as ever. And when they decided that it wasn't working and they went to take the chain away, it couldn't be moved. It was stuck onto the statue, onto the glass prince, and they couldn't remove the black chain. The fool was beside himself. Oh, what was I thinking? I being an adventurer trying to solve a magical problem? I am just a lute playing rubber chicken slinging idiot fool clown. What was I thinking? Now I've made the situation go from heartbreakingly bad to painfully worse. Even if he came back to life, he'd be stuck in this iron chain. I am such a fool. Time passed, and the fool thought, you know, I may have made a mistake, but I should not give up. Just because this one went wrong doesn't mean there's not a cure. And there's more witches to go and see. Surely someone has an answer. I will take it upon myself to go and find this other witch and see what I can find to cure the prince both of the chain and of being a glass prince. And so he got his trusty donkey and he went out of the castle and he went through the forests and by the lake and past the quaint little picnic spot where he had that lunch once with Jolene, but she went on to a career in secretarial work and he became an idiot. Excuse me, a professional fool. And he arrived at the flaming cottage of the Red Witch. Now, the cottage was made of a wood that will burn forever, and so her cottage was always in flames. And he hesitated to knock on the door, so he got himself a big thick branch from a tree, and he used it about 10 feet away to tap, tap, tap on the door, burning off the last couple of feet of the branch while he did so. But the Red Witch was inside, and she heard the knock, and she opened the door and said, "Who requires the attention of the Red Witch?" And the fool said, "I need the assistance and the wisdom of someone so powerful that they can burn a house and live in it at the same time. Surely you must be able to unravel the deep magic that has turned the prince to glass." And the Red Witch said, I can, of course I can. What will you give me in return to do this task?" And the fool said, "I know that red witches love flame, so I have brought you wonderful, beautiful things to burn from the castle. I have brought you silk tapestries and silk robes and silk garments. I have brought you beautiful foods from the kitchen, all of which you can offer into your fires." And the Red Witch took the bags of silk tapestries and clothing and food, and she chucked them into her house, and she said, "Good, good, I will do this for you." And she made a path through the flames so the fool could get into the cottage. And there was a copper cauldron, and out of the copper cauldron was belching flame, and it was incandescent flame. It was red and orange and yellow and white flame. And she said, "Take this and put it all around him so that he is engulfed in my magic flames. This will burn away any curse." And the fool said, "Now how am I going to carry fire? Those are flames. I'm just a poor fool. I'm wearing muslin. I'm going to go up like that." And the witch said, "Give me your pointy hat, the one with the bells on it, and I will lend you my copper cauldron, and you may use it to carry the flames back." So the fool took off the hat that his great uncle, who had also been a fool, had made for him by hand, so that he could then join the family profession and the great lineage of being an idiot. Those bells had been handed down from his uncle's father. His grandfather, he had once owned those bells and made them jingle to please 3 kings back. But he gave this hat to the witch because he loved the prince so much, and he thought, "I'm middle-aged. I've seen enough of life. This poor prince has seen hardly anything. He deserves the chance. It's worth sacrificing my hat." So he gave the hat to the Red Witch, who jostled it and giggled with it and played with it, and of course it went up in flames in a matter of minutes in her hands. But the fool got the cauldron, the copper cauldron, and with special gloves that she allowed him to use, he carried it out. He fastened it somehow onto the back of the donkey, and off they went back to the palace. He got to the palace, and he tipped the copper cauldron and poured out whatever the burning substance was that kept these flames going, for who knows what witches use in their tools, some toad gonads or worm eyelashes, or perhaps a bat's cane. And he put these all around the prince very close so that the prince was now engulfed in these intense flames. And he waited for the magic to happen. And he waited. And he waited. And he waited. And nothing happened. It was just fire and iron chains and a glass prince. That's it. No transformation. The fool was beside himself. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? These are witches. They play tricks. I mean, I'm clever, but I don't know tricks. What was I thinking, that I could outsmart a witch and get her to perform this magic? What was I thinking? I'm just a fool. A few weeks went by, and the fool, every day coming to visit the glass prince, kicking himself for making it go from bad to worse to horrible and engulfed in flames. Finally, he stopped beating himself up just enough that he remembered there's one witch left. And he had heard some very good stories about this witch. This witch had helped people cure pimples. This witch knew how to make a really good sponge cake, magical sponge cake. People loved it. He thought, I'll give it one last try because I don't know of any other source of magic or wisdom that could possibly help. And so once again, he left the castle with his trusty donkey, and he went over the fields and through the farmlands. And he went up, 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 up the mountain to where it was snowing. And there, in the snowy crags of the mountains, in a small, discreet, but elegant castle made of pure white marble, he found the White Witch. And he knocked on her alabaster door. And it immediately opened wide. And she said, come in out of the cold. And once he was inside and had shaken the snow off his shoes and his epaulets and his now bald head, because you know what happened to the hat, the White Witch greeted him and he saluted her. And she said, what brings you to the snowy domain of the White Witch? And he said, I am a fool. The prince has been turned to glass. And I went to the Black Witch, and all that happened was that now I have a glass prince wrapped in heavy magic iron chain. Then I went to the Red Witch to see if I could get rid of the chain and cure the prince. And now the rose garden, the roses are all wilting from the heat of the flames. There's a flame-engulfed glass prince wrapped in a black heavy chain. Do you know anything that can undo these 3 spells? And the White Witch said, I don't know everything. I don't know all the mysteries. But in such an intractable situation like this, the one thing I recommend is music. And the fool is like, music? How is music helpful? I mean, I play music. I play a lute. It's what I do for my job. And the White Witch said, I know. Music is your greatest, most powerful skill. Go play music to the statue. So the fool left empty-handed, because he already had a lute, with his donkey. At least the ride home was more comfortable. And he got to the courtyard, where the glass prince was still glass, still wrapped in a heavy iron chain that was as black as the midnight sky without stars, and engulfed in fire with the wilting roses. And he sat down, and he got out his lute that was made of gnarled maple and birch. And he began to play. And he played songs that were at first fun and lively and silly. But because the fool loved the glass prince, the prince, so dearly, he eventually turned to ballads. And he sang his heart out. He sang with gusto stories of love gone wrong, of love misbegotten, of broken hearts, and of just love, kind, beautiful, friendly love. Now here's what happened. The music drifted over the rose garden walls, and it was heard by all people around, in the town surrounding the castle, in the countryside surrounding the town, even as far as the deep, deep forest surrounding the kingdom. His song carried on the breeze. And a hunter, a young hunter of about 16 years of age, heard the song in the deep, deep woods. And he came in his ragged leathers, animal skins, uncombed wild hair. He was a hunter-ranger. He made his living roaming through the forest and trapping animals and finding wild herbs that had medicinal properties. He knew the forest like the back of his hand. He'd grown up there. And he would bring these to the town and sell them and make his money and get some food and some things like sewing needles and thread so that he could go back and make his clothes from animal skins that he had trapped. He heard this music. It was really the first time he'd heard music other than the babbling brooks and the songs of birds and the wind through the leaves. And this twanging, lyrical, full-throated voice moved him, and he had to find out what it was. And so he came to the town, and he listened. He kept absolutely silent the whole time from the walk from the forest onward, so that he could hear where the music was coming from. And he followed into the kingdom, through the gates of the kingdom, and he went through the town deeper into the kingdom, and he went deeper into the kingdom till he got to the castle, and then he went through the gates of the castle, and then he went deeper and deeper into the castle, until at the castle's very center, in the courtyard, in the middle of the castle, he came to the rose garden, and the fool playing the music. When the fool saw he had company in the rose garden, and this had never happened before, the courtiers had stopped visiting the glass prince long ago, sometime around the time that the chain went in, certainly weren't coming around after the fire started. The fool looked up, realizing for the first time in months he had company. And he saw this hunter, this ranger, with his leather boots and leather clothes and wild, raggedy hair with berries and burrs in it. And he stopped playing. And he said, "Hello, who are you?" And the hunter said, "I have no name except what the sounds of the babbling brook gave me. But I'm a hunter from the forest and a ranger, and I heard this extraordinary sound that you're making. I'd never heard it before, and I had to come and find out who was singing and why your music is so sad and does not have the joy that the babbling brook has, and does not have the friendship and the kidding and the playfulness that the birds have, and does not have the subtle elegance that the wind through the leaves has. Why is your music so sad?" And the fool said, "Sad music comes from a sad heart." And the hunter said, "What has made a fool's heart so sad?" And the fool said, "Tragedy and my own foolishness." And the fool told the whole story of the king's departure, the queen's preoccupation with war, and the glass prince, the prince that had turned to glass, and then his mistake of applying an iron chain now magically stuck to the prince, and then the fires burning around the prince. And the hunter said, "Well, I know the solution. When a bear attacks you, you have to slay it. It's gotten the scent of your flesh and it wants it. And so it won't stop attacking until you've slain it. I will go and take care of this black chain and this fire. Let's take care of what we know we can fix first." And the fool said, "You are welcome to try. I have tried. I am incapable. I surrender to you." So the hunter took his bow and arrow, and he went off to find the Black Witch. And at the Black Witch's cave, he saw that he would have to go down, down, down inside to get her attention. So what did the hunter do? Well, he used something that he had seen against her. He gathered wood and leaves, and he started a fire at the mouth of the cave. And the fire burned higher and higher. And because he threw so many leaves on it, it made a lot of smoke. And because he had built it at the mouth of the cave, the smoke went into the cave and filled it up, until shortly thereafter, the Black Witch emerged, coughing and sputtering. And right as she stumbled out of the smoking cave, the hunter, who was hiding behind a tree, took his bow and arrow and shot her through the heart with an arrow, and she dropped down dead. And the minute she dropped down dead, the iron chains around the glass prince fell off. Now the huntsman went across the countryside to see the Red Witch, but he couldn't get near her burning cottage. In fact, she had seen him coming and made the fires even brighter. So how was he to winkle out the Red Witch? Well, he thought for a minute and thought what he could use. And finally he came up with an idea. And he dug up her garden. And he took all of the soil of the Red Witch's garden. It was mostly radishes and chili peppers. And he took the soil and he threw it onto her roof, and he threw it onto her walls. He kept digging and digging and throwing soil on her cottage until it smothered the fires. When the fires went out, the Red Witch came out of her cottage, shivering, and said, "Who has turned off my fire? I'm freezing to death." And right then the hunter, hiding behind a tree, took out his bow and arrow and shot the Red Witch through the heart, and she fell down dead. And the minute she fell down dead, the fire surrounding the glass prince went out. And the fool, with a few pages, was able to drag the chains away from the glass statue. Now the hunter had one witch left, and so he went across the forest and the farmlands and climbed the mountain up, up, up into the snowy, craggy peak where the marble and alabaster palace of the White Witch was. And he knocked on the door because he understood that he did not have to force her to come out or to kill her, for she had done nothing to worsen the situation of the Glass Prince. So the White Witch came out and saw him, and she said, "Ah, it is the young man of the forest. What do you wish to ask me?" And the young man said, "You are the wisest person in the entire kingdom." And he told her the story of what had happened with the jester, which she knew, and he told her the story of killing the Black Witch and killing the White Witch, the Red Witch, excuse me. And the White Witch said, "Well, I'm sorry for my sister's loss, but they had never been up to much good. They had always turned men and women the wrong way and led them astray. What can I do for you?" And the hunter, the ranger, the young man with the wild hair said, "I would cure this Glass Prince. Can you tell me how?" And the White Witch looked him in the eye and said, "Cure him? Have you even seen him? Go, look at him. Then you will know." The hunter ranger was very puzzled by this, but he trusted her wisdom. And he said, "I'm going to give up all of my thoughts about what I think we ought to do, and I'm going to surrender the whole situation over to the advice of the White Witch." And he turned around and he went back to the kingdom. He went down the mountain and through the forest and over the farmland and over the plains and into the town and in through the palace gate and into the courtyard where the roses were coming back to life and the fool was sitting and waiting and the Glass Prince sat glimmering in the sunlight. And the young hunter went over to the Glass Prince, and he knelt down in front of the statue, and he looked at the Glass Prince right in his beautiful crystal eyes. And he looked, and he looked, and he looked. And the day went on and turned to evening, and just when the sun had gone down, but the light was still luminous and filling the sky, and the moon had risen full on the horizon, filling the eastern sky with a big silver disk, the young man suddenly realized at who he was looking. He realized he was looking at his best friend from when he was 5 years old, 4 years old, 3 years old, 2 years old, 1 year old. He was looking at his lifelong friend, his playmate, and his heart overflowed with love and sadness at the same time. And do you know what happens when love and sadness fill your heart and overflow at the same time? He cried. He wept. And as his tears fell from his face, they landed on the Glass Prince. And where the tears landed on the Glass Prince, the glass gave way like snow melting in the spring to reveal the ground, and the glass gave way to skin and clothes and hair. And the wild man, the hunter, ranger, now filling more with happiness than with sadness, with immense gratitude flowing, gushing from his heart, wept even harder, because once you're crying, even if you turn happy and turn grateful, the tears keep coming. And in this way, He washed the Glass Prince with his tears, and the Glass Prince was washed clean of glass. And when the prince had been fully restored, he stood up and he looked at the hunter and saw immediately in those eyes who it was. And they hugged, and they hugged, and they wept, and they laughed, and they never let go of each other. And for the rest of their lives, which they spent together, they would never spend more than 5 minutes apart, which is just about enough time to go to the bathroom. They lived and loved together happily ever after. I hope you live happily ever after. And in the times when it's not happily ever after, remember, music